Okay, this is lesson 9.2, which is multiplying and factoring with monomials and polynomials. So there's two big things we're going to look at today. The first one is that you can multiply a polynomial by a monomial. And the second one is that you can find the GCF, which stands for greatest common factor, and factor a monomial from a polynomial. So we're going to start with this first one. I can multiply a polynomial by a monomial. So if you look right here, I have a monomial and I have a polynomial. And I'm going to multiply my monomial by this polynomial. So I go ahead and I go through and I'm just distributing here. So I start with 2g to the third times 3g squared. So I come over here and I take this out. Now this goes to chapter 8 in our laws of exponents. So 2 times 3 is 6. G to the third times g squared. We add those exponents, so it's 6g to the fifth. That's where we get the first one. Now I'm going to distribute 2g times 6g. 2g to the third times 6g, which I did over here. And so remember, 6g to the first. So 2 times 6 is 12. 3 plus 1 is 4. So that's where I got the 12g to the fourth. The last one is 2g to the third times negative 5. So 2 times negative 5 is negative 10, and that's g to the third. So what we did here is we multiplied a polynomial by a monomial. So that's how we do our first step. So now what I want you to do is try quick check 1. This is on page 500. There are 3 problems there. So hit pause, try each of those. You're multiplying a polynomial by a monomial, and hit play when you're ready. Okay, let's look at how you did with these. So on the first one, 4b times 5b squared. So that's going to be 4 times 5 is 20. And this is really b to the first, so 1 plus 2 is 3, b to the third. Plus 4b to the first times b squared. Remember, this is like 1b squared, so 4 times 1 is 4. Now I add that up, 1 plus 2 is 3. 4b to the first times 6, so 4 times 6 is 24b. So that's what you should have had for the first one. Coming over to b here, I have negative 7h times 3h squared. So it's going to be negative 21. Negative 7 times 3 is negative 21. And again, this is h to the first. 1 plus 2 is 3. Negative 7h times negative 8h squared. So that's going to end up becoming a positive 56h squared. Same thing here. Negative 7h times negative 1. That's a positive 7h. And part C. So here I've got 2x times x squared. So that's going to be 2x to the third, because 1 plus 2 is 3. 2x times negative 6x is negative 12x squared. Again, that's a 1 there. 1 plus 1 is 2. And 2x times 5 becomes positive 10x. That's how you should have done. Okay, so we know how to go if we are multiplying a polynomial from by a monomial. Now we're going to go backwards. So now we're going to be given something like this, and we need to go backwards to get to this step. And what we're really doing when we do that is we're finding the greatest common factor and factoring the monomial from the polynomial. So now we're going to go backwards. So what is a greatest common factor, this whole GCF business? So a greatest common factor, if I look at like the numbers 8 and 12, first I'm going to write down all the factors. So these are all the factors of 8. 1 and 8, because 1 times 8 is 8, and 2 and 4. Those are all the factors of 8. All the factors of 12. 1 and 12, because 1 times 12 is 12. I've got 2 and 6, 3 and 4. So what is the greatest common factor? 4. Because they both, that's the largest number they have in common. They also both have 2 and 1, but that's not the greatest one. I want the greatest common one. So what about when it's not numbers, but when it's variables? So I have x to the fifth and x to the eighth. Well, the same principle applies. So all my factors of x to the fifth. 1 times x to the fifth is x to the fifth. X to the first times x to the fourth is x to the fifth. X squared times x to the third is x to the fifth. So these are all my factors. And notice this is just, I mean, you're literally just writing down, you have 1, then you have x to the first, x squared, x third, x fourth, x fifth. Same thing with x to the eighth. You can go through and say 1 times x to the eighth, x times x to the seventh, x squared times x to the 6th, because 2 plus 6 is 8. Or you can just list them all. When you list them, what's the greatest one they have in common? X to the 5th. And so really, when you just have a variable raised to an exponent, you're just looking at whatever that lowest exponent is. So as far as the degree, so this one would be x to the 5th. If it had been x to the 6th and x to the 8th, then your greatest common factor would have been x to the 6th. So let's look at how do we factor using this, how do we factor a monomial from a polynomial. So first you have to find the greatest common factor. So I have 6g to the 5th plus 12g to the 4th minus 10g to the 3rd. So first I'm going to write down all my numbers, 6, 12, and 10. And I listed all of their factors. So 6, I've got 1 and 6, and I've got 2 and 3. That's all of them. 12, 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4. For 10, I've got 1 and 10, 2 and 5. What's the greatest one they all have in common? It's 2. So I take the 2 and I put it out in front. Now I look at my variables. I've got g to the 5th, g to the 4th, g to the 3rd. What's the greatest common factor there? G to the 3rd. Because if I list all these out, it's going to be g to the 3rd. That's the greatest common one. My highest degree is 5, but the greatest common is g to the 3rd. So now it's a matter of working backwards. So you say, okay, 2 times what would give me 6? Well, 2 times 3 gives me 6. And then g to the 3rd times what gives me g to the 5th? G squared, because 3 plus 2 is 5. Now I go to the 12. 2 times what gives me 12? 6, so I write my 6 there. G to the 3rd times what gives me g to the 4th? G to the 1st. Last one, 2 times what gives me negative 10? It's got to be a negative 5. And g to the 3rd times what is g to the 3rd? It's just 1, so I'm done. The nice thing about this is, like, you can always just check your answer after you've factored it. If you go back through, because you're going to get 6 g to the 5th when you multiply these. You're going to get 12g to the 4th, and you're going to get negative 10g to the 3rd. So let's look at another one. So I've got 4x to the 3rd minus 8x squared plus 12x. So first I'm just looking at the numbers. I write down all my factors. 4, 1 and 4, and 2. I don't write 2 twice, even though 2 times 2 is 4, because there's no point. 8, 1 and 8, 2 and 4. And notice I didn't take into account the fact that it's negative. I just put down the absolute value of it. For 12, I've got 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4. Greatest common factor is 4. So the 4 comes out in front. Now I look at just my variables, x to the 3rd, x squared, and x. What's the greatest common one? What is their greatest common factor? It's x. They all have an x in there. So again, you're working backwards. 4x times what gives you 4x to the 3rd? It's got to be x squared, because x to the 1st plus x times x squared is x to the 3rd. 4 times what gives you negative 8? Negative 2. X times x gives you x squared. 4x times what gives you 12x? It's 3. And again, like what I did here is I just checked my answer. I put a little smiley face because it works. Okay, so what I want you to do is try quick check 3. This is on bottom of page 501. There's 3 problems, or kind of middle of page 501. So do those 3, hit pause, and then play when you're ready. Okay, so you are supposed to find the greatest common factor to factor each polynomial. So 8x squared minus 12x. So I'm going to write down 8 and 12, and I listed all the factors. So 1, 2, 4, and 8. 12 is 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and 12. So what is the greatest common factor they have? It's the 4. So I take that 4 out. And then I'm looking x squared and x. What's the greatest common factor there? Well, it's just the x. They both have an x in common. So now I'm going backwards. 4 times what gives me 8? 2. X times what gives me x squared? X. And minus down. 4 times what is 12? 3. And then it's just x times what is x? 1, so I keep that as my answer. Now I'm going to look over here. 5 and 10d. So 5, my only factors of 5 are 1 and 5. And my factors of 10 are 1, and 10. I'll put 10 over here, and then 2 and 5. What's the greatest common one? 5. So I've got 5, and then looking at my variables now, my greatest common factor there is D. 5 times what gives me 5? 1, so I don't need to write that. D times what gives me D to the third? D squared. Plus, because it's a plus, 5 times what is 10? 2. D times what is D? 1, I don't need to write that. So there it is. Last one that you had here. So looking at this, 6, 12, and 24, you should be starting to recognize here without having to write these out. My greatest common factor is 6. And greatest common factor with my variables is m. It's not m squared or m to the third because those are not a factor of m. So then I fill this in. 6 times what is 6? 1. Again, you don't have to write that. M times what is m to the third? M squared. Minus 6 times what is 12? 2. M times what would give me m squared? M. Bring down the minus. 6 times what is 24? 4. M times 1 is m. So there's our answers. So that's it for this lesson. Go ahead and go back and watch any parts that you're unsure of.